She asked for everything in one sentence without shaking. The house, the accounts, the business shares, even the car I drove to work. "I'm entitled to it," she said, sliding the papers across the table like she was closing a deal, not ending a marriage. The room felt smaller after that, like oxygen had been priced out. I remember noticing how calm she looked, already living in a future where I no longer existed in any meaningful way. The humiliation didn't come from the demand itself, but from how prepared she was. Her lawyer joined the call smiling, speaking gently about fair resolution, while listing assets I'd built long before her name was attached to them. Friends I trusted nodded along when she told them I was unstable, that I'd withdrawn emotionally, that she'd carried the weight alone. No one asked what that weight was. They only saw her confidence and assumed it was earned. I agreed to mediation quickly, which confused everyone. My brother pulled me aside and whispered, "You can't just roll over," like surrender was contagious. Even the mediator paused when I said, "She can have it," checking if I understood the consequences. My wife leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "See, he knows when he's beat." The word stuck, beat. Not divorced, not separated, defeated like the outcome had already rewritten the past. At home, the silence became aggressive. Rooms echoed with absence, reminders of decisions made without me. She packed openly, humming, leaving documents on the counter as if daring me to object. One afternoon she said, "You should be grateful I'm not taking more," and laughed softly. I nodded, feeling something crack behind my ribs, a small internal sound I didn't let reach my face. That moment hurt more than the papers, and I made sure no one saw it. The first real pressure came when the numbers were discussed publicly. During mediation, her attorney said, "Given the circumstances, full transfer is appropriate," and no one challenged it. I watched my name dissolve from line items I recognized intimately. She kept glancing at me, waiting for resistance, for drama she could use. When it didn't come, she smiled wider, mistaking silence for surrender. The room accepted that narrative eagerly because it was easier. Friends stopped calling. Her version traveled faster, cleaner. I was painted as broken, indecisive, guilty without accusation. Even my parents asked if I was okay, in that careful tone people use when they've already accepted an explanation. I told them I was tired. That wasn't a lie. Each night I reviewed documents alone, absorbing the cost of compliance, letting everyone believe I'd lost my edge along with my marriage. The hearing date arrived with a strange calm. She wore confidence like armor, dressed for victory, whispering to her lawyer while I sat quietly. When the judge asked if I agreed to the terms, I said, "Yes," clearly, without pause. Her breath caught just slightly, like she'd expected a trick. Instead, I signed everything. The room shifted, pity replaced tension. Someone behind me sighed, relieved it was over. What no one noticed was the blue envelope I slid across last, mixed in with routine disclosures. It wasn't dramatic, just thick, properly labeled, acknowledged with a stamp. Her lawyer glanced at it and nodded, assuming compliance. She didn't open it then. She smiled at me as we stood, whispering, "You did the right thing." I met her eyes and said nothing. Some victories take patience to mature, and this one needed her full signature first. The days after the hearing felt heavier than the months before it. The agreement moved fast, stripping me of access, authority, and familiarity in clean, legal motions. Accounts were frozen to my name, then reopened without it. The business email I'd built became inaccessible overnight. She texted once, "Don't worry, I'll take care of things now," as if stewardship had always been hers. That message traveled through mutual friends quickly, reinforcing the story that I'd finally been relieved of responsibility. Isolation wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. Invitations stopped. Group chats went silent. People who once asked for advice now avoided eye contact, unsure how to speak to someone who'd apparently failed so completely. At a dinner I attended out of obligation, someone said, "At least it's over," without meeting my eyes. I nodded, letting the sentence hang unfinished. Over for whom wasn't a question anyone wanted answered. They preferred closure without context. Financial pressure arrived disguised as fairness. My temporary support was calculated precisely, enough to survive but not stabilize. She took control of properties she'd never managed, signing documents with confidence borrowed from certainty. When a bank representative asked for clarification on a transfer, she laughed and said, "He's not involved anymore," and the line went quiet. I listened later to the recording, noticing how quickly institutions accept a clean narrative when it arrives fully packaged. She began reframing the story publicly. Social posts hinted at new beginnings and choosing peace, language that implied escape from something toxic. I was careful not to respond. Silence fed the perception that I had nothing to say, which worked in her favor. At a family gathering, her sister asked loudly, "So what will you do now?" Like unemployment was contagious. I answered calmly, the same thing I always did, and watched confusion ripple briefly before being dismissed. The paperwork kept coming, dense and relentless. Amendments, confirmations, acknowledgments. Each document required my signature, reinforcing the idea that I was still cooperating, still compliant. My lawyer asked twice if I wanted to slow things down. I said no. Speed mattered. Delay invites scrutiny, and scrutiny at the wrong time exposes intent. I needed her comfortable, confident, certain she'd won so completely that caution felt unnecessary. Late one evening, an accountant I hadn't spoken to in years called unexpectedly. He said, "I received something odd with the transfer package," then paused. His voice lowered when he added, "I don't think she knows what she accepted." I asked him not to elaborate and thanked him for calling. When the line disconnected, the room felt quieter than before. Not relieved, focused. The kind of quiet that sharpens rather than soothes. Her confidence grew louder. She spoke openly about plans, expansions, restructures, using language she'd absorbed secondhand but never tested. At a public event, she introduced herself as the sole owner, smiling as people congratulated her resilience. I stood across the room unnoticed, watching how easily certainty attracts validation. No one questioned the speed of her ascent. They assumed momentum meant legitimacy. Systems often confuse movement with mastery. The pressure peaked when responsibility arrived faster than understanding. She began signing approvals that triggered liabilities she didn't recognize, trusting advisors who trusted her authority. I received automated notices addressed to her, copied to me by default, alerts she didn't yet know mattered. Each one was a quiet signal, a reminder that structures don't care about confidence. They only care about compliance. I archived them without comment, letting time continue its work. The final signal came in the form of silence. Her lawyer stopped copying mine on certain threads, assuming full control had been established. That omission mattered more than any message. It meant the transition was complete, the shield of shared responsibility removed. She stood alone now, legally and procedurally. The blue envelope sat unopened on her desk somewhere, waiting. I didn't rush it. Pressure doesn't need encouragement when gravity is already doing its job. The truth didn't reveal itself all at once. It surfaced in fragments I'd collected over years without assigning meaning to them, like receipts folded into drawers and emails archived instead of deleted. Late nights became audits of my own memory. I wasn't searching for revenge, I was confirming patterns. Wire transfers that didn't match income, shell accounts disguised as consulting fees, signatures that weren't mine but carried my authority. The realization didn't shock me, it clarified. The marriage hadn't ended suddenly. It had been repurposed. I remembered the year she insisted on handling finances to reduce stress. I remembered how relief felt like trust at the time. Statements arrived summarized, not detailed, and I accepted that efficiency was care. Now I saw what those summaries omitted. Businesses registered in jurisdictions she'd once joked about. Loans taken against shared assets without my awareness. The betrayal wasn't emotional alone, it was architectural. She hadn't just prepared to leave. She'd prepared to offload weight before the collapse. The blue envelope wasn't leverage in the way people imagine leverage. It wasn't a threat or a reveal. It was disclosure. Inside were ownership transfers and acknowledgments that legally bound her to entities she'd treated as invisible extensions of herself. I'd learned early that control isn't about holding something tight. It's about deciding when to let go. By agreeing to everything, I'd accepted assets along with obligations she assumed would remain buried. That assumption was the hinge. During the weeks after the hearing, she moved freely, spending loudly, reshaping her narrative in real time. It's finally over, she told friends, posting photos from places we'd planned together. I watched quietly as she celebrated unencumbered, unaware that celebration is a form of confirmation. Each transaction tightened alignment between her public victory and private exposure. She thought she'd exited cleanly. In reality, she'd stepped fully into visibility. Systems don't correct whispers. They correct documentation. The first sign of shift came as silence, not confrontation. Banks stopped responding to her requests immediately. Advisors asked for clarifications they'd never needed before. She called me once, irritation edged with disbelief, saying, "Did you forget to forward something?" I replied, "Everything was included," and meant it. That was the moment I knew certainty had replaced hope. I wasn't waiting for her reaction. I was waiting for institutions to do what they always do when facts stop aligning. She still felt safe then, insulated by assumption. During a brief exchange about mail forwarding, she said, "You always were passive," with a smile that expected shame. I felt none. Passivity implies inaction. What I'd chosen was restraint. There's a difference, and it matters legally. The documents didn't accuse, they confirmed. They didn't reveal betrayal, they recorded it. Her confidence relied on me behaving emotionally. My calm denied her that variable. The turning point wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. A compliance notice arrived addressed to her, forwarded accidentally to me. Routine language, neutral tone, requesting verification of funds movement and ownership clarity. Nothing accusatory, everything exact. I didn't intervene or explain. I archived it and continued my days. Certainty settled in fully then. The path forward no longer depended on timing or reaction. It depended on review cycles and statutory obligations. Those don't rush and they don't forget. I understood then why surrender had felt necessary. Fighting would have warned her, triggered concealment, rewritten trails. Agreement had done the opposite. It froze history at the moment she believed she'd won. Every signature locked her deeper into records she couldn't revise without scrutiny. The power shift wasn't mine to execute anymore. It belonged to processes older than us both. I didn't need to act. I needed to remain consistent. By the time she sensed something was wrong, it was already fixed in sequence. Advisors grew cautious. Friends stopped repeating her story as confidently. Questions emerged without answers. I stayed where I was, grounded and observant, no longer speculating about outcomes. Certainty doesn't require celebration. It requires patience. And patience, when aligned with truth, is not waiting. It's allowing inevitability to arrive on schedule. The first sign that the balance had shifted came without drama. It was an email from her attorney, unusually short, asking to postpone a routine filing. No explanation, no confidence, just delay. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment and returned to my day, because by then I understood how systems reacted when pressure touched hidden fault lines. She still thought she was winning, still posting carefully cropped photos of her new life, unaware that institutions had started asking questions she couldn't charm away. The blue envelope arrived at her condo on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified courier. It wasn't from me, and it wasn't from the court handling our divorce. It was from a federal compliance office, requesting documentation tied to accounts now legally under her name. She later told friends she thought it was a mistake, laughed it off, and said, "They always send scary letters first." What she didn't realize was that the letter existed because she had insisted on owning everything, including responsibility. Her confidence held for another week, right until the phone calls started stacking. First, her bank froze a line of credit pending review. Then her accountant stopped returning messages. By the time her lawyer finally called mine, his voice sounded thinner, less rehearsed, asking questions that didn't have good answers. "When did your client become aware of these transactions?" He asked, and my attorney replied calmly, "He documented them years ago." Silence followed, the kind that settles when inevitability replaces argument. The court hearing that followed wasn't dramatic, and that was the point. There were no raised voices, no accusations shouted across the room. A judge reviewed supplemental filings, glanced at timestamps, and asked her to confirm ownership of assets she had fought so hard to claim. She nodded, still composed, until the judge explained that ownership also meant liability. I watched her expression change slowly, not into panic but into confusion, as if the rules had shifted without her consent. Outside the courtroom, she finally broke the silence. "You knew this would happen," she said, not accusing, just stating it like a discovery made too late. I answered evenly. I knew what the documents showed. That was the only exchange we had because there was nothing else to say. She had assumed surrender meant ignorance, and that assumption was the last decision she controlled. Everything after that belonged to processes far larger than either of us. The consequences didn't arrive all at once, which made them harder to escape. Accounts were audited, partnerships dissolved quietly, and invitations stopped coming. Friends who once defended her certainty began distancing themselves, not out of loyalty to me, but fear of proximity to scrutiny. I wasn't mentioned in those conversations because I no longer mattered to the story. The narrative had shifted from divorce drama to financial exposure, and that shift erased me from the blame entirely. Months later, the settlement was amended without fanfare. I regained nothing flashy, no public apology, no dramatic restitution. What I received was distance, legal closure, and my name removed from entanglements that no longer belonged to me. She kept the properties, the accounts, the public image she'd curated, but they came with obligations that followed her everywhere. The victory she celebrated had become a weight she couldn't set down. The last time I saw her was across a parking lot, both of us waiting for separate meetings in the same building. She looked smaller somehow, not defeated, just occupied by consequences that didn't need my involvement. I nodded once out of habit, and she hesitated before returning it. Walking away, I understood that revenge didn't require visibility or satisfaction. It required patience, accuracy, and the discipline to let truth do the work without interference. The truth finally surfaced without drama, without a courtroom showdown, without my voice ever rising above calm. The blue envelope she opened that morning wasn't addressed from me, and that detail mattered more than anything. It came from a federal agency she didn't recognize, heavy paper, official seals, language that doesn't ask questions. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but later I was told she went completely still, like someone who realizes the ground beneath them was never solid. That silence was the loudest sound of the entire divorce. Inside that envelope was not a threat, but confirmation. Ownership transfers she had demanded now placed her name directly over accounts tied to undeclared income. Shell transfers and falsified disclosures she had insisted were handled. The irony was precise and unforgiving. By taking everything, she had taken responsibility too. Her lawyer stopped returning her calls within hours, and the friends who had praised her strength suddenly became unavailable. Institutions don't care about confidence, only signatures, and hers were now everywhere that mattered. The investigation unfolded methodically, the way real consequences always do. No raids, no public spectacle, just letters, audits, and scheduled interviews that couldn't be postponed. I received one call from my former attorney, his voice careful, saying, "You're no longer listed as a person of interest." That was it. No congratulations, no apology for doubting my strategy. The system simply corrected itself, and I was quietly removed from a problem I no longer belonged to. Her reputation collapsed faster than her finances. The same people who had whispered that I was weak began revising their memories out loud. Stories changed, timelines shifted, sympathy evaporated. She tried to reach out once, a short message that said, "You knew, didn't you?" I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because the question no longer required an answer. She had already answered it herself by demanding everything without asking why I agreed. The house she fought for was sold under pressure, not celebration. The accounts she drained were frozen, then re-examined. The lifestyle she had posted about became evidence, not envy. I moved into a smaller place across town, quiet, clean, unremarkable, and slept through the night for the first time in years. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It settles when the noise finally exhausts itself. For the first time since the divorce began, my name was no longer being discussed at all. People assume revenge looks like triumph, like standing over someone else's loss and feeling powerful. That was never the point. The real shift happened long before the envelope, back when I stopped trying to be believed by people invested in misunderstanding me. I didn't win because she lost. I won because I didn't lie to protect her lies anymore. The system didn't punish her because I asked it to, but because she forced it to look. Months later, I ran into someone we both used to know, and they hesitated before speaking, then said, "I guess you played it smarter than we thought." I smiled politely and corrected them gently. "I didn't play anything," I said. "I just stopped interfering." That distinction mattered. Silence wasn't surrender, it was alignment with reality. When someone insists on taking everything, the most powerful response is to let them carry it all alone. The divorce is officially over now, finalized without appeal, without lingering threads tying my future to her decisions. My life is smaller on paper but lighter in every way that counts. I didn't rebuild to prove anything, and I didn't stay to watch consequences unfold. When effort becomes invisible by design, withdrawal isn't rebellion. It's clarity. And clarity, once accepted, doesn't need witnesses to be complete.